Okay, let's go through this. I guess we call it practice test 4, but the actual exam. So, which choice is the graph of this function? Let me get some. This function right here. Okay. So the easiest way to do this, I think, is to find my zeros. So where across my x-axis where y is equal to 0. So I'll set y equal to 0. So 4 minus x is equal to 0, and x plus 2 must be equal to 0. So I solve each one of those. So x is equal to 4, and x is equal to negative 2. So the point 4, 0, because we just solved when x is 4, y is 0, and we also solved when x is negative 2, y is 0. They both must be on the graph. Well, there's negative 2, and there's 4, and the only graph that has that is A. Now, an alternative, if you didn't think of this, is you could, if you had time, you could just start plugging x's in, simple x's, and calculate the y and graph it. So if you're really stuck, you can do the alternative. But the easiest way is to say, find my zeros, which is where it crosses the x-axis, by setting my function equal to 0, and then solving. All right, number 2 is a similar kind of question, only it's now inequalities. So if you remember, if it's less than or greater than, it's a dotted line. If it's greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to, it's a solid line. So this is less than, so they all better be dotted lines, and they all are, so that didn't help us one bit to eliminate anything. Well, another way we could do this is to plug in some values that, remember, it's the shaded area is a solution set. So let's take 0, 0, because it's shaded in some and not shaded in the other, and it's an easy thing to calculate. So if I plug 0 for x and 0y into my function, I get 2 times 0 minus 0, which is 0 is less than 4. Well, that makes the statement true. So we now know the point 0, 0 must be shaded. Well, we can eliminate B, right? And I can eliminate C. So we're down to A or D. Well, let's pick a point that's shaded on one but not shaded on the other. So the point 0, 10 is shaded on D but not shaded on A. So let's see if the function at 0, 10 works. So when x is 0, 2 times 0 is 0, minus 10 is a negative 10. Negative 10 is less than 0, so it's true. So 0, 10 must be shaded. Well, that helps us. We can now eliminate A, and the only answer left is D. Okay, write the expression as equivalent to this. Okay, so we'll just FOIL this function. So we just x times 3x, x times a negative 3, 2 times 3x, 2 times a negative 6. Combine my like terms, and I get 3x squared plus 3x minus 6. Number 4. So this is a line passes through a point, and it's so they've given us a slope, because remember this parallel lines have the same slope. So we know the slope of our line must be 4. So we must use the point slope formula, which is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And we just plug them in, and we get the equation y equals 4x plus 2. And it's asking us for what the b is, the value of b. So the value of b is 2. Next one I think is a field question. This is the hardest question on this whole thing. What is the largest integer? So the value of g of x is greater than f of x. Well, I just plugged in some values. So I tried when x is 1, when x is 4, and I figured out what f of x was, and I figured out what g of x was. And is g of x greater than f of x? So I keep going till this becomes false. And I figured out that 6 is the largest interval. That was probably the toughest question on the whole exam. All right, company models its income in thousands of dollars with the function. So f of x is my income, where x is the number of units of products sold. How many units for a net income equal to 0? So I want income of 0, so I set y equal to 0. And the first thing I did was, now I got to factor this. So the first step in factoring is to take out the greatest common factor, which is 9, because 9 goes into 9, 9 goes into 54, and 9 goes into 144. So I get x squared minus 6x minus 16, so I have to come up with factors that multiply to a negative 16 and add to a negative 6. So that's negative 8 and a positive 2, because negative 8 times 2 is a negative 16. Negative 8 plus 2 is a negative 6. So my answers are 8 and 2, are negative 2, but I can't produce negative 2 units. So in this case, the only answer that's viable is 8. Okay, Joanna has, this is coins, so let's let n equal the number of nickels, q is the number of quarters. So our first equation is equation for the number of coins, so n nickels plus q quarters equals 50, because there's a total of 50 coins. And then we do an equation for the dollar value. So each nickel is worth 5 cents, each quarter 25 cents, and the total is $7.10. And the only equation that looks like that is number A. Okay, what is the meaning of the y-intercept? Okay, so the y-intercept, remember, is when x is equal to 0, right? So that's my initial starting point. So that would be the initial height of the candle. Total cost in dollars is this for a 1-year membership. M is the number of months, so this is a little tricky. So 1 year is basically 12 months, so we simply have to find C of 12. So we just put 12 in for M and do the arithmetic and come up with 280. What is the water? So this is you need to recognize this is a slope question. So I ended up with 3.9 feet of water. I started with 2.4, and my time went from 4 to 130, which is 1.5. So I calculate my slope is 0.6. So that's it. The water is increasing 0.6 per hour. So at 5 o'clock, which is 1 hour past 4, I had 3.9 at 4 plus the 0.6 gives me 4.5. This was another really hard one. Sally Works, you can calculate this one. I holler if you have questions. This one, solve for P. So they give you a function T equals this, solve for P, you just isolate P, right? So the first thing I did was subtract 581s, and then I divided by 150. All right, what is the value of the positive zeros? Okay, again, this is calculator inactive, so you gotta know a little bit about your perfect squares. So x squared minus 121, remember 2 terms, when you're factoring 2 terms, think difference of perfect squares, and x squared is a perfect square, and 121 is 11 times 11. So we got x plus 11 and x minus, so the positive 0 is x equals 11. Number 14, what is the value of x in the system of equations before? Okay, so they tell us that y is equal to 1 minus x, so we can just substitute that into our first equation for y. So we have 5x plus 4 times 1 minus x equals 1, and then we simply simplify and we get x equals 5/9. What is the value of the smaller 0 of the function? So first of all, we got to know what a 0 is. A 0 we set is where our y value is equal to 0, so we set y equal to 0. Next thing we have to remember is we're going to factor now, so we got to factor out a 2, and then we got to get factors that multiply to a negative 12, but add to a negative 4, so that's negative 6, 2. So our answers are x equals -2 and x equals 6. The smaller of those two is a -2. Set of 9 points, which statement is true? Well, if we had a huge outlier like 45, 45 is way bigger than any of these numbers. So our mean and our median are both going to increase. Number 18. What is the distance? So the distance, if they're both on the y-intercept, the distance will just simply be the difference between the 2 points, right? So the key here is I know the one y-intercept is -18, right? Because that's already in mx plus b format. So we've got to take this function and figure out the y-intercept. So the first thing we had to do is calculate the slope. So change in y over change in x. And then we know, so we know the slope and we know 1 point. So I took a slope and then 1 point on this line. And then I calculated the y-intercept to be +5. So the distance between -18 and the +5 is a +23. Because distance is always in a positive number. What is the value of x in the equation here? So this is simply testing your ability to make sure you have your rules. So 2 times x is 2x. 2 times 8 is 16. Then I combine my like terms, so I get -2x plus 16 equals 10x plus 4. Then I'm going to subtract 10x from both sides. Minus 12x equals a -12. Divide both sides by a -12, and x equals 1. The last one on here, okay, this is tricky. But if you look at this and this are identical. But this and this are different numbers. So there's no way that this can equal one number and the exact same thing can equal a different number. So this one has to be no solutions, right? That's got to be the no solutions guy, right? Now if you look at this guy, right, all I do is double this. They're basically the same equation because this one times 2 is 4x plus y equals 6. So these are basically equivalent functions. They're the same function. So there's infinite solutions. Anything will work. You've got lots of x and y's that'll work. And then the last one, there is no such thing, so that's going to be our one solution. Okay, there's the first 20 questions.